When doctors told her she had 6 months left, her son was packing for a vacation not to see her, but to celebrate his wife's mother. What no one knew that day was that the dying woman they left behind would soon vanish and make them regret ever treating her like she didn't matter. My name is Anne Morales. I'm 74. I taught 7th grade English for 30 years in Hackensack. I own a small 2-story in a tidy New Jersey cul-de-sac paid off, taxes manageable, windows that stick in the humidity like they always have. I live there with my son Evan and his wife Hana. Their marriage is 5 years old. Our arrangement is newer than that, born from the kind of conversation families call practical. The word sounded responsible when we first used it. Later, it would sound like something else. The oncologist spoke gently, like I was a porch swing in a wind I couldn't see. We'll start treatment. We aim to slow it. I want you to begin getting your affairs in order. He didn't say, prepare to die. He said, in order. It was a teacher's phrase, really. Not the end of the lesson. Just straighten your desk. Clear the board. Make room for what's next. I nodded because nodding is what you do when you don't know how to hold the air. He offered pamphlets, Medicare, transport assistance, clinical trials. He was kind. Too kind. It made the floor feel less steady than if he'd been cruel. In the parking lot, late winter sun scattered off windshields. I sat in my car and watched my hands on the steering wheel. They have my mother's veins. Years ago, I used these hands to grade essays and stir soup and unzip the back of a prom dress my neighbor swore she'd never fit into. Now they trembled. Not fear. Not yet. More like the body acknowledging the math of it. At home, the house did what houses do. It pretended to be solid. The living room held the same beige sofa Evan swore he'd replace. The kitchen smelled faintly of last night's garlic. Lydia's scarf, the expensive one, hung from a chair back like it had always been there. Lydia is Hana's mother. She is refined in the way that looks effortless and costs a fortune. She visits often. She has favorite mugs, favorite shows, favorite opinions about how I salt the green beans. She calls me Annie, which I let slide because fighting over a syllable is just one more chore. When Evan and Hana moved in, it was supposed to be temporary. A year, maybe 2. They sold their condo. Prices were up. We'll save for something with a yard, Evan said, grinning that boyish grin that once got him out of a speeding ticket. Mom, you keep the master bedroom. Non-negotiable, Hana added, hugging me with that sudden urgency daughters can have real ones, the kind I don't. I believed them. I wanted to. After your husband dies and the house gets too quiet, you learn to accept warmth wherever it appears, even if it arranges itself unevenly on the couch. The first year was fine, better than fine. Families run on shared jokes and divided chores, and we had both. I cooked because I liked to, and because Evan never met a sauté pan he couldn't scorch. He fixed the porch light and trimmed the hedges and tackled the sort of tasks that make a woman feel less alone in a world that is always testing the hinges. Hana added watercolor prints to the hallway, lightened the rooms, called me the heartbeat of the house after my chicken soup brought her through a bad flu. I believed her then. I wanted to. Later, the small shifts began. Lydia's visits multiplied like a rumor. Sundays became Lydia's day without anyone naming it. I noticed how Evan's voice got softer around her, how Hana watched Lydia's approval land like sunlight. I noticed that when Lydia praised a dish, "Oh, Annie, that's lovely," everyone smiled, and when she didn't, everyone noticed. Lydia liked her pasta al dente and her salmon barely cooked through. She liked the thermostat at 72. She liked the guest room aired out and turned down like a boutique hotel when she stayed the night. It was easy to give in to those preferences because giving in is what polite people do in small spaces. It took the fever to teach me the difference between polite and invisible. It came on a Thursday. I'd been tired all week, chalk it up to age, to errands, to weather, but by noon the room tilted, and the forehead thermometer blinked 101.3. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to my heart beat through the cotton of my robe. I opened my door, called for Evan. He came, phone still in hand, thumb moving. "Mom, you okay?" He looked older than he used to, or maybe I just looked up at him from someplace I hadn't been before. "I'm not feeling well," I said. "I think I need to be seen." He checked the time, not the thermometer. "Grab a rideshare? Or call the bus? I'm in the middle of something. Hana's on with her mom trip logistics. Lydia's birthday. A spa suite at the shore. Non-refundable, I would learn, is a word that can cut through bone. I can take the bus, I said, because I am the kind of woman who hates being told she's helpless. He kissed the top of my head in that distracted way he used when he was 9 and wanting to get back to his video game. He meant well. It didn't help. 2 buses and a waiting room later, a resident listened to my lungs and frowned. A scan, a longer wait. The oncologist returned with that careful voice and those careful eyes and that careful word order. "You have people?" he asked. "Support at home?" I smiled like an actress auditioning for Capable Widow Hasson. "Of course," I said. "We're a full house." I went home by cab because the bus felt like a dare I didn't need to take twice in a day. The house was quiet. On the kitchen island sat takeout containers for 3. "Mom, sorry Lydia's avoiding heavy sauces. A post," it explained in Hana's tidy script. I made tea. I set a spoon on a saucer and watched the steam curl. I imagined telling them everything at once, laying the pages on the table. Here is what we are facing. Here is what we will not pretend away. Then the front door opened, and the conversation swerved sideways before it began. "Annie, you will not believe the suite they held for us," Lydia sang, stepping out of her shoes without untying them. "Ocean view, real Egyptian cotton, and," she cupped her hand over her mouth, as if the house might gossip, "adult-only pool." She laughed. Hana laughed with her. Evan carried in grocery bags he hadn't bought. "Mom," he said, "you good? We got you that herbal tea you like." I looked at the tea already in my hand. "I'm good," I said, and heard how still my voice sounded compared to theirs. That night, I lay awake and listened to their planning through the wall. Lydia wanted 2 dinners, one formal, one casual. Hana had a spreadsheet. Evan said, "We deserve this." The word hung there like a chandelier. Somewhere in that conversation, I vanished, and they didn't notice, and the worst part was I'd taught them how years of smiling through headaches, of refilling glasses without being asked, of making everything soft and seamless so no one ever had to see the seams. That's what good mothers do. That's what good women do, until it becomes what ghosts do. When the house fell quiet, I sat up and switched on the lamp. The discharge papers lay on my nightstand, white and declarative. I read them all the way through, every clause, every number that held my future like a stopwatch. Get your affairs in order. In order. My mind lined up tasks the way it always had before a new school year. Syllabi, seating charts, call lists. If I could organize 37th graders, I could organize a life. I took out an old legal pad, the yellow one with the bent corner, and started to write. Bank, deed, will, charitable directives, storage, apartment options near the hospital, transportation vouchers. Contact Rosa, the social worker at the community clinic, who'd given a talk at church last spring. She'd said, "You don't have to be alone to be on your own." I'd written it in the margins of a bulletin and forgotten it. Now it returned like a bell. At 2 a.m, Evan cracked my door. "You up?" He stood there in the hallway's dim light. Hair sleep, must. For a second, he looked like the kid who once crawled into my bed after a nightmare about a flood. My mouth opened. I could have said everything. I could have handed him the papers and asked him to be the son I raised. I could have let him hold the weight so I wouldn't have to. "I'm fine," I said instead. "Habit is stronger than truth in the dark." "Okay," he whispered. "Big day tomorrow. Try to sleep." He closed the door gently. In the quiet that followed, I looked at the list again. I added one more word. Keys. By morning, the fever had eased, and the house smelled like Hana's citrus cleaner. The spa bags were by the door. Lydia wore sunglasses, though the day was overcast. "Be good, Annie," she said in the tone people use for dogs. "Text if you need anything urgent." Urgent. Another word that can make your life small. I walked them to the driveway because that's what you do when you want to prove to yourself you can still walk. Evan hugged me longer this time. "We'll bring you something," he said. He meant well. He always does. When the car turned the corner, the street was suddenly wide. I stood there and felt the February air take stock of me. 6 months, maybe less. Affairs, order. My hands didn't tremble now. They knew what to do. I went inside, pulled the file box from the hall closet, and set it on the dining table. I made a fresh pot of coffee. I opened my laptop. I typed, real estate agent near me, and then, after a breath I didn't realize I was holding, I typed senior apartments near Valley Hospital. The search results populated: addresses, phone numbers, images of sunlit lobbies and tidy kitchens. I clicked the first one and reached for the phone. On the third ring, a cheerful voice answered. "Good morning, this is Meadowview Residences. How can I help you?" I looked at the house keys on the table. I could feel the grooves in the metal under my thumb. "I'm calling," I said, and heard my voice land with a steadiness I hadn't felt in days, "to ask about availability." At first, nothing looked broken. The house still smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent. Sunlight still stretched across the kitchen tiles at that same tender angle. But somewhere inside that warmth, something fragile had already cracked. Anne Morales had spent her entire life keeping things together. When her husband died 20 years earlier, she hid grief behind casseroles and lesson plans. When bills piled up, she picked up tutoring hours. And when her son Evan married Hana, she opened her home and her heart without hesitation. "You'll always have a place here," she said, not knowing that someday those words would feel like a curse. The first months together were peaceful, almost happy. They ate dinner at 6, watched reruns, teased each other over whose turn it was to do dishes. Hana often said, "Mom, you have to try this show, you'll love it," and Anne would laugh, feeling seen. Lydia, Hannah's elegant mother, visited occasionally, perfume and pearls announcing her before she even stepped through the door. "Your daughter-in-law is a blessing," Anne's church friends would tell her, and she believed it. But love in a shared house erodes slowly, one favor, one compromise at a time. Lydia's visits turned from monthly to weekly, then to something closer to residency. Her robe appeared in the guest room, her tea on the counter. "She's just helping Hana plan for the future," Evan said, though there was no grandchild on the way. Dinner became Lydia's stage. "The soup's a bit salty, don't you think?" she'd say, smiling just enough to make it sound polite. Hana would nod, eager to please. Evan sometimes slipped and called Lydia Mom. The first time, Anne laughed. The second time, she felt something inside her ribs twist. She didn't correct him, she just kept serving. Silence, after all, was easier than starting a war in a house that no longer felt like yours. By spring, the rhythm of the home was no longer hers to conduct. The thermostat stayed at Lydia's preferred 72. The pantry stocked her brand of sparkling water. Anne's name was still on the deed, but the house already belonged to everyone but her. She told herself it was fine they were young, still learning, but learning never came. One Friday morning, Hana appeared in the doorway, a half-packed suitcase at her feet. "Mom," she said sweetly, "Evan and I are taking my mom to the shore for her birthday. 3 nights. You'll be okay, right?" Anne blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "Could you water the plants and make sure the trash goes out Sunday?" Hana added, kissing her cheek like a nurse finishing a shift. There was no thank you, no. "Are you feeling all right?" Only instruction. When the car pulled away, Anne stood on the porch, watching until the street fell quiet. For the first time, the silence didn't comfort her. It felt like proof that she'd already been left behind. 2 days later, the fever returned. Her lungs burned. Even the stairs seemed taller. She called Evan. "Sweetheart, I think I need to see a doctor." His voice came filtered through laughter in the background, Lydia's laughter. "Can you grab a rideshare, Mom? We're kind of far out. Just text me when you're there." So she did. She walked to the bus stop with her insurance card in her purse and a handkerchief tucked into her sleeve, the way her mother once taught her. At the clinic, the nurse frowned at her oxygen levels and ordered another scan. "Come back next week," the doctor said. "Bring someone with you next time." Anne smiled politely. Of course. She didn't bother to explain that there was no one to bring. That night, the house was spotless. On the counter sat 3 clean glasses, washed, dried, put away. They'd eaten here without her. She looked around the kitchen and felt something new settle inside her. A quiet, steady thought that refused to leave. What if I stopped showing up too? She ignored it at first, but over the coming weeks, that quiet thought would grow into something else, a plan. The kind of plan that would make the people who once ignored her finally realize what it means when the one who held everything together simply walks away. The week after the clinic visit, the house tried to return to normal, as if normal were a switch you could flip. Evan brought home groceries he hadn't paid for. Hana compared spa menus with her mother on speakerphone, and I set 3 plates on the table because that was what my hands knew to do. The doctor's phrase, "get your affairs in order," kept circling like a ceiling fan you can't turn off. I decided to wait 2 days before saying anything, not because I wanted the right moment, because I wanted to see if anyone in this house would make one. They didn't. Lydia arrived with a suitcase and a tone that made the air feel crowded. "We'll leave before traffic," she announced, already adjusting the thermostat. Hana beamed at her the way daughters do when approval is a moving target, and Evan stood between them, his smile trying to hold everything steady. I watched them the way a teacher watches a class she loves, but can't protect from the tests they didn't study for. That night, their trip planning bled through the wall. It wasn't cruel. Cruelty has edges. This was softer, the kind that convinces itself it's harmless. They argued about dinner reservations, formal or casual, first laughed about finally getting some space, and practiced the sentence they'd use if I asked for anything while they were gone, non-refundable. The word had become their shield. I lay in the dark and listened to my heartbeat. Not fast, not panicked. Just there, like an engine idling in a driveway you no longer own. In the morning, I carried laundry down the stairs and misjudged the last step. It wasn't dramatic. No scream, no thud that shook the house. Just a slip, a sharp white bolt up my right arm, and the instant understanding that something in my wrist no longer lined up. I sat for a minute on the bottom stair and breathed, then stood, then did what older women in America do when pain becomes paperwork. I called a cab. At the ER, the X-ray looked like a thin branch with a notch cut out. Distal radius fracture, the physician said, already moving to the treatment plan. At your age, we want to immobilize and keep you for observation a night or 2. Do you have someone to call? I had numbers. Whether I had people was a different question. I dialed Evan anyway. He picked up on the second ring, cheerful and rushed. "Mom, I'm grabbing parking passes. What's up?" "I fell," I said. "At the stairs. They're keeping me a couple days." Silence. The brief kind where you can hear someone calculating which obligation will cost more. In the background, I heard Hana's voice and the light clatter of Lydia's bracelets. Evan exhaled. We're leaving in the morning. It's all prepaid. They'll take great care of you there, right? Can I call you tonight?" "You just did," I said. I meant it as a joke. It wasn't funny. He fumbled for reassurance. "We'll bring you something. That lemon cake you like." "Lemon cake." The hospital bracelet itched. "Drive safe," I said, because I couldn't think of a sentence that would make him be the son I needed him to be and not the man he had become. A nurse settled me into a small room with a window that overlooked the parking lot and a television that stayed politely off. She wrote my pain schedule on a whiteboard and explained call buttons as if I were new to being careful. When she left, I tried to nap. In the mid-afternoon quiet, my phone buzzed. Evan again. "Just checking," he said. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, because the alternative would only make the drive more awkward for him. Hana's voice cut in speakerphone, a convenience that always makes private things public. "Mrs. Morales, we're so sorry. We'll text you the hotel number and wait, Evan. Tell her about the dinner switch." "I can hear you both," I said. They laughed, apologizing without adjusting anything. We said goodbye, except we didn't, not really, because no one ended the call. I don't know how long the phone sat there, line open, voices small and slightly tinny, like a radio in the next room, long enough to hear their relief loosen. Long enough to hear Lydia say, "In a way, the timing worked out. We'll have the whole house to ourselves when we get back, no fuss." Long enough to hear Hana agree, soft and honest in the way people are when they think they aren't being watched. It's easier without her shadow. I can't breathe when she's always present. I'd thought rejection would sound like shouting. It didn't. It sounded like planning. It sounded like convenience. It sounded like the casual confession that the woman who cooked your meals and folded your towels and made your life frictionless had become the friction. I ended the call and stared at the ceiling tile as if it could answer for them. The resident stopped in once more before evening rounds. "Pain manageable?" she asked. I nodded. The truth was, pain wasn't the thing I needed managed. Clarity was. It had arrived without drama, the way color arrives when the sun changes position. I wasn't surprised. I was simply done translating other people's comfort into my dignity. The decision didn't feel like anger. Anger needs an audience. It felt like finally speaking a language I'd been fluent in as a girl and somehow forgotten. My own. In the morning, a case manager came with a clipboard. Do you have support at home for discharge meals, transportation, that sort of thing? It's a standard question, phrased to keep the answers short. I'll arrange it, I said. I'm moving. She paused, eyes warm, as if she'd learned not to be startled when women my age tell the truth. We can give you a list of services. Also, senior apartments near Valley, if you want proximity between treatments. I do. I took the list, along with a pen, and the kind of folder that makes you feel like a project manager for your own life. While they fitted the splint, I made 2 calls. First, to Meadowview Residences, the senior building I'd bookmarked after the diagnosis. The leasing agent recognized my name from yesterday's inquiry. We've got a corner unit open on the 10th floor. Elevator access in. Building clinic shuttle. Would you like to tour? Yes, I said. And I'd like to know what you need from me to hold it. Proof of funds, ID, emergency contact. We can do applications by email. Email. Proof. Contact. I had all 3. The second call was to a small real estate office 2 blocks from my house, run by a man who still used paper calendars and remembered names from parish events. I'm selling, I told him. The house is in my name. I'd like a quiet process and a quick close. Mrs. Morales, he said, kindness without pity. We'll handle it discreetly. Come by when you're ready or I'll meet you where you are. Discharge took time, the way all discharges do. Paperwork must be printed and signed, signatures must be countersigned, and the human being who is moving from one chapter to another must sit in a chair by a window and pretend that waiting is a neutral verb. I called Sachi from church, the retired nurse who always brought casseroles to families that had just lost someone. She answered on the first ring. Anne? I need 2 favors, I said. A ride from the hospital that isn't my son, and a witness for a couple of signatures. Say when, she replied. When came at 2:30. On the drive, I kept my wrist still on my lap and watched the town I'd taught in slide by brick row houses, the deli that refused to modernize its menu, the school where I'd handed out copies of To Kill a Mockingbird like a promise education still knows how to make. Sachi didn't fill the air with advice. Good friends know the difference between presence and instruction. Are you scared? She asked once, not as a test but as an invitation. I'm not, I said, surprised to hear it and to mean it. I think I've been scared for most of my life and called it being nice. This feels like something else. At Meadowview, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. A concierge looked up with professional warmth that wasn't performative. 10 minutes later, we were in a corner unit that faced a sliver of trees and a halo of sky. I didn't picture sunsets or dinner parties. I pictured waking up without waiting for footsteps in a hall that demanded a fresh pot of coffee and a plan for a day I hadn't chosen. I'll take it, I said. We sat with a tablet at a round table, the leasing agent walking me through forms written in a bureaucracy dialect I'd spent a career translating for parents. Proof of funds, ID, emergency contact. I typed. I signed. I asked for a move-in date that would make most people blink. The agent didn't blink. 2 blocks away, at the real estate office, the agent ran comps and nodded. Inventory is tight. If we price it correctly, it'll go fast, and we can screen for cash buyers. Are you sure about this? He meant, are you sure you want to cut the cord everyone else assumes you'll cling to? I'm sure, I said. We scheduled photos. We reviewed disclosures. I authorized him to speak to the title company and my bank. My wrist ached. My mind didn't. On the sidewalk afterward, I set the folder on a bench and watched a bus pause at the corner. A week ago, I'd ridden one alone to a clinic because my family had a spa package. Today, I had keys to a place where the word emergency would mean the thing it's supposed to mean. Back home, no, not home. Back to the place that would soon be a listing I let myself in, moved carefully to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. The house was quiet. Their suitcases were gone. The guest room bed was smooth. The pillows plumped for Lydia's eventual return. I placed my hospital discharge papers on the dining table, then my new lease, then the listing agreement on top. I looked at the stack like a teacher looks at a completed gradebook. Not triumphant, just settled. My phone lit up with a text from Evan. "We just checked in. How are you?" I typed back, "Discharged. Resting. Enjoy your trip." Before I set the phone down, I added a reminder to call a locksmith on Monday, not because I wanted drama, because I wanted doors that opened for the person holding the key. By the time the sun leaned against the blinds, I'd separated the essentials from the sentimental. The essentials fit into 3 boxes. The sentimental could be scanned, stored, labeled. I made a list for a storage unit, then dialed a company that specializes in discreet pack and holds. The woman on the line asked for dates and dimensions. I gave her both. When I finally sat, the house made the same sounds it always makes: pipes clicking, the refrigerator sighing, the quiet you mistake for peace when you're too tired to argue. I folded the hospital bracelet into the trash and turned off the overhead light. In the dark, the decision settled fully into place. Not a threat, not a performance, just a fact. When they returned, they would find exactly what they had asked for without knowing the price. Space. I would make sure they had it. By the time the weekend ended, the hospital smell had faded from her wrist brace, but the clarity that came with it hadn't. Anne woke early on Monday, made a pot of coffee, and wrote 3 lists: what to pack, what to leave, and what to erase. She'd always lived by lists, lesson plans, grocery runs, chore charts for her son when he was little. They'd kept chaos from looking like failure. Now, they would turn grief into logistics. She started with the obvious: photographs, certificates, the file of bills labeled mortgage paid. The irony didn't miss her. Every signature she had ever added to a line was proof of work no one saw anymore. By noon, she had filled 3 boxes and stacked them in the hallway. The movers she'd booked came at 2. They were polite, efficient, the kind of men who didn't look at you long enough to guess the story behind the job. When they asked where to deliver the load, she handed them a storage address and an envelope with cash. "Keep the receipt," one said. "I have it," she replied, and meant more than the paper in his hand. The locksmith arrived right after. "New set," she said. "Front, back, and garage. 1 copy." He nodded, did the work, swept the filings into his toolbox. The new keys clicked cleanly into place. No stick, no hesitation. He left the old ones in a plastic bag on the counter. She threw them in the trash. Late afternoon, her realtor texted, "Cash offer received. Buyer requests early closing. Call to confirm?" She called. "Take it," she said. His intake of breath was half shock, half admiration. "I'll handle the paperwork." "I know you will." For the next 2 days, Anne lived like a tenant passing through her own life. She scrubbed countertops, wiped windowsills, packed dishes she wouldn't use again. Her right hand ached, but she kept moving. At night, she slept in the guest room, an experiment in detachment. The master bedroom looked staged already. Bed made, nightstand bare, the faint dent of her body in the mattress fading a little more each morning. By Thursday, everything was set. The sale was final. Funds wired, donations sent. 1 check to a literacy program that trained single mothers for teaching credentials. Another to an elder support network that paired volunteers with seniors who didn't have family. When she'd taught, she'd told her students that verbs built the world. Give still did. Her last errand was the bank. The clerk, a young woman with neat braids and a name tag that said Kayla, smiled when Anne placed the cashier's checks on the counter. "Downsizing?" she asked. "Because it's what you ask when you don't know you're looking at a revolution disguised as retirement." "Something like that," Anne said. She watched Kayla type her information into the screen. Numbers appeared, rearranged, confirmed, a signature, a stamp, a polite farewell. It was easy, almost too easy, to move an entire lifetime with a pen. She stopped next at the charity office to hand-deliver the donation forms. The director, a man about her son's age, shook her hand. "We'll make sure this helps where it's needed most." She believed him. People who do quiet work rarely have time to lie. Outside, the air felt lighter. She walked to the bus stop, sat on the bench, and realized she hadn't checked her phone in hours. When she did, there were 3 messages from Evan. "You okay? We're back tomorrow. Call when you can." She didn't answer. She had one thing left to do. That night, she returned to the house and opened every window. The rooms breathed differently, cooler, less owned. On the dining table, she left a single envelope, addressed in her precise teacher's handwriting, to Evan and Hana. Inside was the storage key, the code to the locker, a copy of the sale documents, and one line in blue ink: "You asked for space. I gave it to you." The movers came the next morning for her final boxes. By noon, she was standing in the living room, sunlight reflecting off the empty picture hooks on the wall. For a moment, she touched the doorframe where she had once measured Evan's height every birthday. The pencil marks were faint but still visible, the last one just above her eye level. She let her fingers rest there, not as farewell, but as acknowledgement. Then she closed the door, locked it with the new key, and slid it into her pocket. The cab ride to Meadowview was quiet. The driver kept the radio low, soft jazz, static between stations. When they stopped under the awning, the concierge recognized her from last week's visit. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morales," he said, holding the door. The phrase caught her off guard. Home. It fit. In her new apartment, she set the keys on the counter, unpacked a mug, and filled it with tap water. The view from the 10th floor stretched over rooftops and trees. The horizon was clean and ordinary. She took a slow sip, felt the cold against her teeth, and smiled not because it was sweet, but because it was hers. That evening, as the sun went down, she placed her phone on the table, turned the ringer off, and let the silence arrive fully. She wasn't waiting anymore for a call, for an apology, for permission. In the distance, she could almost hear her old house settling into the hands of strangers, the way all homes eventually do. Tomorrow, her son and his wife would come back from their trip, keys that no longer fit jangling in their hands. She didn't need to imagine the moment. She'd already lived it every time she'd stood outside her own life, knocking. The Morales house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with dogwoods and identical mailboxes, one of those neighborhoods where nothing dramatic ever happened. But that Monday evening, something did. When Evan and Hana pulled into the driveway, still sunburned from the shore, they expected the same routine: the porch light left on, dinner half prepped, Anne's voice calling from the kitchen, "Take off your shoes, it's clean in here." Instead, the house stared back at them like a stranger. The light was off. The curtains were drawn. The air felt hollow. Evan jiggled his key in the lock once, twice. It didn't turn. "That's weird," he said, trying again. "Did she?" Hana cut him off. "Maybe she double-locked it. Try the back door." They circled to the patio, suitcases rolling behind them like obedient pets. The back door didn't budge either. That's when Hana noticed the small white tag hanging from the handle: locksmith service. Completed 3/12. Her stomach went cold. "Evan," she whispered, "the locks were changed." He laughed once, the brittle kind people use to push back panic. "There's no way. She'd never—" But the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Grant, stepped out with her mail and saw them standing there. "Oh, you didn't know?" she said, lowering her voice. "The house sold last week. Moving trucks came Friday. I thought you'd already gone." Hana blinked. "Sold?" Mrs. Grant nodded, sympathy mixed with curiosity. "The agent said the new owners move in next month. Your mother's such a lovely lady. She said she was downsizing." She smiled, the kind of smile people give when they think good manners will soften bad news. "I'm sure she'll call." Evan's breath stuttered. "Call," he repeated, pulling out his phone. The first ring sounded normal. The second dragged. By the third, he started whispering, "Come on, Mom, come on." When she answered, her voice was calm, steady, almost tender. "Hi, sweetheart. You're back. Mom, what's going on?" "The house, why can't we get in?" There was a pause, then a quiet exhale that sounded like a page turning. "Because it isn't your house anymore," she said. "Or mine." Hana leaned in close to the speaker. "What do you mean, not yours? You can't just—" "I left you a letter by the front door," Anne interrupted softly. "Everything you need to know is inside." "Mom, we can talk about this," Evan insisted, voice rising. Just come home, we can fix it." "I am home," she said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was the kind of peace that makes apologies too small to matter. Take care of each other. Then the line clicked. For a moment, neither of them moved. The street felt suddenly too bright, their suitcases absurd against the curb. Hana dropped to her knees, searching the doorstep until she found the envelope. Inside, a single key to a storage unit, a printed receipt from the title company, and a handwritten note. "Evan, Hana, I've given you space, exactly what you asked for. The rest is yours to figure out." "Mom." The handwriting was perfect, Teacher perfect, the kind that told you no word had been written in anger. That made it worse. Evan sank onto the step, pressing the paper against his leg like it might change its mind. She really did it, he whispered. She sold it? Hannah's voice cracked. She sold it and didn't say a word? She didn't need to, he said. We weren't listening anyway. The next morning they went to Hana's mother's condo, hoping for comfort, maybe shelter. Lydia opened the door in her robe, her expression already tense. You two look terrible, she said. Come in. They sat at the table while Hana tried to explain. She changed the locks, Mom. Sold the house. We didn't even know she was moving. Lydia listened, arms crossed. I know, she said finally. The hospital called me last week. They had me listed as an emergency contact, probably a mistake. She'd fallen, broken her wrist. I thought you knew. Hana's breath caught. She was hurt? Apparently. The nurse said she'd been discharged, made her own arrangements. You didn't go see her? Evan stared at the floor. We were on the trip. The spa trip, Lydia said flatly. For once her tone wasn't superior, it was disappointed. Do you know who visited her in the hospital? Me. She was crying, Evan. Not because of the fall, because she didn't want you to worry while you were on vacation. Hana's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God. Lydia's face softened, but only slightly. You two used her. You let her carry the weight and called it love. She was never the problem, you were. And now she's gone, and I can't fix that for you. She pushed her chair back, the scrape loud in the silence. You'll need to find your own place. I'm not enabling another dependency. The words hit harder than she intended, but the truth had waited too long to stay polite. Evan nodded slowly. You're right, he said. We'll figure it out. When they left, the March wind bit through their clothes. The storage key felt heavy in his pocket. Hana didn't speak until they reached the car. She warned us, she said quietly. Every single time she looked tired, every time she said she was fine. She was telling us we were losing her, he replied. We just kept hearing convenience. That night, Anne sat by the window in her new apartment, watching the city lights blink through the bare branches. She'd unpacked her books, arranged her teacups, set a single photo on the nightstand, a picture of Evan at 7, gap-toothed and laughing, holding a kite that had never flown. The doctor's words still echoed sometimes. 6 months, maybe less. But time no longer frightened her. It was hers again. The phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it, then let it ring until the sound disappeared. A message followed short, hesitant. Mom, I understand now. Please call me. She smiled faintly, not unkindly, and turned the phone face down. Some lessons, she knew, had to be finished in silence. The weeks that followed unfolded quietly, like the soft ticking of a clock in another room. For the first time in decades, Anne's days belonged entirely to her. There were no footsteps above, no voices calling her name from the hallway, no obligations hiding inside questions that began with, "Could you?" or "Would you mind?" Her new apartment wasn't grand, but it was clean, bright, and hers alone. The mornings came slowly, with sunlight pouring through the blinds and the smell of fresh coffee instead of cleaning spray. Freedom, she discovered, didn't arrive as celebration. It came as silence and the realization that she didn't have to fill it. At Meadowview, she became something rare, a woman who smiled easily but shared little. The other residents noticed her, the way people notice someone who seems to know a secret. Mr. Patel, the concierge, always greeted her by name. Rosa, the social worker, stopped by once a week to check on her health. They'd sit by the window and talk about everything but dying. Rosa had learned that some patients need more space than sympathy. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Morales?" she'd ask. Anne would smile. "Alive enough to want tomorrow." She kept her condition private. No pity, no worried faces. Her treatment schedule was simple: 3 hospital visits a month, light therapy, careful medication. She handled it all herself, even when her wrist ached, even when her breath shortened walking uphill. The independence wasn't pride, it was survival. Her bank statements were tidy now. 1 rent payment, a few donations, groceries, and a small recurring transfer to a local literacy fund she'd started under a quiet name, the Second Chances Project. She liked the symmetry of that, helping strangers rebuild their lives, while her own, piece by piece, was being rebuilt too. Sometimes, at night, she found herself tracing old habits, listening for doors closing, for someone to need her. The air stayed still. She'd pour tea, sit by the window and whisper, "This is what peace sounds like." Evan and Hana's lives, meanwhile, had taken on a different rhythm, one that started with panic and ended in exhaustion. They were living out of a small rental on the edge of town, one bedroom, one window, and a heating system that coughed more than it worked. Hana took a part-time job at a diner. Evan went back to the office, no longer the easygoing man everyone liked, but the quiet one who never stayed for drinks. They argued often about bills, about groceries, about nothing at all. One night, Hana stared at the cracked ceiling above their bed. "I used to think your mom was controlling," she said softly. "Now I think she was the only one holding us together." Evan didn't answer. He knew she was right. The guilt was constant there when he brushed his teeth, when he passed a mother and son at the park, when he reached for his phone but couldn't bring himself to call. He'd tried, many times. Each call went unanswered. The voicemail box filled with half-finished apologies. "She doesn't owe us a reply," Hana said once, trying to be gentle. "You heard her voice that day. She's done living for other people." Evan nodded, but inside, the silence was heavier than punishment. 3 months later, an unexpected letter arrived, not from Anne, but from Sachi Reed, the retired nurse and church friend who had helped her move. The envelope was hand-addressed, careful, and firm. "Dear Evan and Hana, I hope you don't mind me writing. Your mother asked me not to share details about her health, but she also didn't want you left in the dark. She's been receiving treatment for some time. The fall she mentioned wasn't an accident. It was part of something larger she didn't want you to worry about. She's at peace, truly. She doesn't wish to be visited yet. She says she needs time to live as herself. If there are things you need to say, write them. I'll see that she receives them." The letter ended there. No address, no invitation, just the soft warning of someone who knew what boundaries meant. Evan read it 3 times. "She was sick," he said quietly. "The whole time, and she didn't tell us." Hana looked at him, tears in her eyes. Would we have listened if she had? He didn't answer. That night, he sat at the kitchen table and began to write. No grand apology, no excuses, just the truth, written like a prayer. "Mom, I thought love meant fixing things. You taught me it means respecting what's already built. I hope you're safe. I hope you're not alone. I'm sorry for every time I made you feel small in your own home. I know now you were never the problem. We were just too young to see it." He folded the letter, sealed it, and handed it to Hana. "Will you mail it?" he asked. She nodded. They both knew they might never get an answer. But some words weren't meant to come back. They were meant to release what had been held too long. Back at Meadowview, Rosa found Anne sitting by the window with a small envelope in her lap. "From the Reeds," she said, recognizing the handwriting. Anne opened it carefully. Inside was Evan's letter. She read it once, twice, then set it on the table beside her tea. Her eyes stayed dry, but her breath trembled. Rosa placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" Anne nodded. "He's learning. That's all I ever wanted." Rosa smiled. "You could write him back." "I will," Anne said softly. "But not with words, he'll understand." That evening, she walked down to the front desk and left an envelope for Mr. Patel. Inside was a small document, her will, simple and clear. No wealth, no property, just a trust fund for the Second Chances Project. At the bottom, she'd added one more note. Executor, Evan Morales. Let him finish what I started. When she returned to her apartment, she stood by the window and watched the city lights scatter like reflections on water. Her breath was shallow, her heartbeat slower. She sat down, folded the blanket across her knees, and let herself rest. For once, there was nothing left to manage. No chores, no waiting. She whispered into the quiet. "You see, Evan, this is how a mother forgives, by teaching her child to live without her." It was early May when Rosa found Anne in the hospital again. The cancer had progressed, quietly but relentlessly. Her body had begun to slow down, though her mind stayed sharp, almost defiant. The doctors spoke softly now, their words carefully padded with compassion. "We'll focus on comfort care," they said, avoiding the final word that everyone already understood. Anne simply nodded. She'd spent her entire life preparing others for reality grading papers, giving feedback, raising a son. She didn't need anyone to soften the truth for her. The room overlooked a small garden where tulips bent in the wind. She liked to watch them, the way they yielded but never broke. Her nights were quieter here, less lonely than she'd imagined. Nurses came and went. Rosa visited with fresh flowers and stories about the residents back at Meadowview. Even Mr. Patel stopped by once, bringing a small packet of the tea she liked. "Your son came by the lobby last week," he mentioned gently. "He asked if you were here." Anne looked up, her expression unreadable. "And did you tell him?" "I said you were where you wanted to be," he replied. She smiled faintly. "Good answer." Later that evening, Rosa sat by her bed, folding papers into Anne's nightstand folder: medical updates, consent forms, a stack of letters from community groups, thanking her for her donations. "You've helped a lot of people," Rosa said. Anne's voice was soft but steady. "Then maybe it wasn't all for nothing." 2 days later, Evan and Hana arrived at the hospital. They had written ahead through Sachi, who had told them Anne was ready to see them once. Only once. They walked down the long corridor in silence, holding hands not out of comfort, but to keep each other from turning back. When they reached her room, the door was open. Anne sat by the window, her wrist still in a soft brace, a book resting on her lap. The afternoon light made her look smaller but not weaker. When she saw them, she didn't flinch. "You found me," she said simply. "Mom," Evan began, his voice trembling. She lifted a hand. "Sit down first." They obeyed. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't tense, it was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Evan tried again. "Why didn't you tell us you were sick?" Anne smiled sadly. "Because when I needed you most, you were busy deciding who deserved your attention, and I got tired of auditioning for my own family." Hana started to cry. "We didn't mean to make you feel that way." "I know," Anne said. "That's what made it worse." Evan leaned forward, his eyes red. "I don't want to lose you without fixing this." "You can't fix me," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "You can only change what you do with what's left." For the next hour, they talked. Not like enemies, not even like family. Like people standing at the edge of something they could never fully cross again. Evan apologized not with excuses, but with memories. He told her how he'd kept the old photo of them at the pier taped inside his wallet. How he and Hana had started volunteering at a community kitchen because they wanted to learn what she'd meant by doing something for the right reasons. Anne listened, her expression softening with each word. "You've learned what I hoped you would," she said. "That love isn't comfort, it's responsibility." Hana wiped her eyes. "Can we see you again?" Anne hesitated. "I think one more time would be kind." "When?" "When I ask," she said. They nodded. They knew what she meant. When they left, Anne lay back against the pillow, exhausted but calm. The nurse came in to check her vitals. "You did well today," she said. "I let go," Anne murmured. "That's harder than holding on." That night she couldn't sleep. Instead, she opened her notebook and began to write slowly, carefully, in her old teacher's script. "Dear Evan and Hana, if you're reading this, it means I've done what I promised. I lived the rest of my days my way. Don't think of this as goodbye. Think of it as a grade. The last one I'll ever give. You both passed, finally. You learned what matters." She paused, looking at the words before continuing. "I don't forgive you because there's nothing left to forgive. You grew. You learned. That's all I ever wanted. Take the lessons, not the guilt. It's lighter that way." She folded the page and placed it in the drawer with her will. The act of closing the drawer felt like closing a book. She rested her hands on her lap, eyes on the window. Outside, the tulips swayed again. For the first time in years, she felt herself move with them, still standing, still bending, still here. The next morning, Rosa arrived to find her sitting in the same spot, the tea still warm on the bedside table. "Good morning," Rosa said softly. Anne looked up and smiled. "It is." They spent the morning talking about small things, weather, books, how the garden needed rain. When Rosa left at noon, Anne said, "If you see Evan, tell him I'm proud." "I will," Rosa promised. By evening, the room was quiet. The monitor's pulse slowed, then steadied, then faded into a flat line that seemed more peaceful than tragic. Anne Morales had gone the same way she'd lived her final months, without noise, without complaint, but entirely on her own terms. 2 weeks later, a simple service was held at the chapel near Meadowview. No grand speeches, no formal eulogies. Just a few friends, Rosa, Sachi, and standing quietly in the back, Evan and Hana. When it was over, Rosa handed Evan a small envelope. "She left this for you," she said. Inside was the note she had written the night before she died. At the bottom, beneath her careful handwriting, she had added one final line. "P.S. The project is yours now. Keep giving people the second chances I won't need anymore." Evan folded the letter against his chest and whispered, "I will, Mom. I promise." A year passed, the kind of year that ages people quietly, not in their faces, but in the way they hold a coffee cup or pause before speaking. Evan and Hana moved into a small duplex near downtown, paid for with long hours, second jobs, and something rarer than either of them had possessed before: humility. Their apartment wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a small balcony, a table just big enough for 2 plates, but it was clean, honest, and earned. Every Sunday morning, they drove out to the small cemetery on the edge of town, the one near the hospital where the tulips bloomed in spring. The headstone was modest, smooth gray granite with only 5 words carved into it. She lived as herself, no dates, no titles, no beloved mother. Anne had chosen it that way. It was both message and warning. That morning, Hana laid down fresh flowers and brushed the dirt from the letters. "A whole year," she whispered. "Feels like yesterday." Evan nodded, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets. "Feels like a lesson I'm still learning." He knelt down, placed his palm flat on the cold stone. "You'd probably tell me to stop apologizing," he said softly. "So I won't. But I still hear you. Every time I want to make something easy instead of right, I hear you." Hana smiled faintly. She'd like that. They stood in silence, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Behind them, the wind moved through the trees like a slow breath. In the months after the funeral, Evan had taken over the Second Chances Project. It had started small, a local reading program for single parents, but under his care, it had grown into a full nonprofit, teaching life skills and literacy to women starting over after divorce, layoffs, or loss. The first time he stood in front of a classroom to speak, his voice trembled. "My mother used to say education isn't about success," he told them. "It's about dignity. It's about remembering you still matter." The women nodded. Some smiled, some didn't. He didn't need them to. Just showing up was enough. After each session, he'd walk past the photo on the wall, a simple black and white portrait of Anne, taken by Rosa a few months before she passed. Her expression was calm, a small hint of pride in her eyes. Beneath it was a brass plaque, "Founder and Teacher Emeritus." Sometimes he'd stop and say out loud, "We're doing it, Mom." And for a moment, the old guilt would lift, replaced by something gentler, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. At home, life between him and Hana had changed too. The edges had softened, the blame burned out. They cooked together, laughed more, fought less. There were nights they'd sit on the balcony, watching lights flicker across the city, wondering how someone could lose everything and still feel rich in ways they'd never known before. One evening, Hana said, "Do you ever wish she'd given us another chance before she left?" Evan thought for a long moment. "She did," he said finally. "She gave us a different kind of one, the kind that makes you grow up." He took her hand. "She didn't teach us how to need her. She taught us how to be worth missing." A few months later, Rosa invited them to Meadowview's annual community night, a small gathering to honor residents who had passed. The room smelled faintly of roses and candle wax. Names were read aloud. Photos appeared on a screen, faces of people who'd lived, laughed, faded. When Anne's appeared, a hush fell over the room. Rosa stepped up to the podium. "Anne Morales didn't make noise," she said. "She made change. The kind you don't see until you realize the room's quieter because the chaos left with her." Afterward, Rosa found Evan near the refreshment table. "She'd be proud," she said. He smiled. "You already told her, didn't you?" Rosa's eyes softened. "I don't think she needs telling." Outside, the night was cool. Evan looked up at the building, the 10th floor window where his mother had once sat watching the city lights. He imagined her there still, hands folded, half smiling at the irony of it all. She'd left him nothing to inherit except the one thing he needed most: conviction. As they walked to the car, Hana slipped her arm through his. Do you think she forgave us? Evan looked ahead, the wind lifting the corner of his jacket. I think she outgrew the need to. The next morning, at the nonprofit's small office, Evan unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and saw an envelope sitting on his desk. It was unmarked, thin, no return address. Inside was a photocopy of Anne's handwriting, the same looping cursive he'd seen on every note she'd ever left him. One line, nothing more. People don't change because they're told to. They change when they finally listen. He smiled, folded it carefully, and pinned it to the bulletin board above his desk. Beneath it, he wrote one word in pen: listening. Then he turned to the window, watching the city wake sunlight striking glass, buses moving like arteries, people hurrying toward ordinary lives. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to chase anything or anyone. Anne's story hadn't ended with her death. It had become a mirror, quiet, unwavering, and painfully honest, reflecting what happens when love finally learns the difference between possession and respect. As the camera would fade in a documentary, the narrator's voice would settle low and steady. She didn't shout, didn't fight, didn't beg to be seen. She simply left. And by doing so, she taught everyone who'd ignored her the loudest lesson of all, that sometimes the most powerful act of love is walking away. It's strange the way legacy works. It doesn't live in what you leave behind. It lives in how people move after you're gone. 2 years later, the Second Chances Project had grown beyond what Anne could have imagined. The small classroom she once dreamed of had become a network of community centers across 3 counties. There were volunteers, sponsors, a waiting list of students. Every wall carried a piece of her handwriting, a quote, a note, a reminder. Respect doesn't ask for attention, one sign read. It earns it quietly. Evan still worked there full-time, now with a small team that looked to him not as a director, but as the calm gravity in the room. He didn't talk much about his mother's illness anymore, but he spoke about her choices, how she had turned her final months into something unshakably free. When new volunteers asked why he named the organization Second Chances, he would smile and say, "Because someone gave me one long before I deserved it." That spring, Hana became pregnant. The news arrived softly, no tears, no screams, just quiet disbelief. She told Evan one night after dinner, her voice trembling. "I'm scared," she said. "What if I'm not ready?" He took her hands and said what Anne once said to him when he was 10 years old. "Nobody ever is. You just love them enough to learn fast." For months, he prepared the nursery with a care that bordered on reverence. He built the crib himself, hand-sanded the wood until it gleamed. On the wall, he hung a single photo, Anne, standing in front of her old house, smiling at a camera she didn't know was watching. The light behind her looked like morning. One evening, while folding baby clothes, Hana asked, "What will you tell our daughter about her grandmother?" Evan looked at the photo. "That she didn't die bitter," he said. "She died free. And that's the only kind of inheritance worth leaving." The baby came in September, a girl they named Anna Grace Morales. When Evan held her for the first time, he felt a weight and a lightness that collided inside his chest. "She has your mother's eyes," Hana whispered. He didn't answer. He just smiled, and somewhere deep in him, something healed. The hospital lights flickered softly overhead. Machines hummed. He thought about all the hospital corridors his mother had walked alone, how she'd sat with bad news and made it the seed of something good. He whispered to the newborn in his arms, "You'll never have to wonder if you matter." That night, he dreamed of Anne not as a ghost, but as a memory that had finally learned how to rest. She was sitting by her apartment window again, the tulips swaying outside, and she was smiling. Not proud, just peaceful. Months passed. The baby grew. Evan worked days, Hana nights, and somehow they met in the middle. They talked less about what they'd lost and more about what they'd learned. Some nights, when the baby cried, Hana would hold her and whisper, "Your grandma taught us how to listen, little one. That's why you're safe." One Sunday, after church, they visited Anne's grave again. The tulips were blooming wild now, spilling past the edges of the headstone. Evan placed his daughter's tiny hand on the granite and said quietly, "Meet the woman who taught us what strength really looks like." He stood back, holding Hana's shoulder. "I used to think Mom leaving us was cruel," he said. "But now I get it. She wasn't punishing us. She was showing us how to survive without permission." Hana nodded. and how to love without conditions. They stood there for a long time, the wind threading through the grass, the world around them moving on as if nothing monumental had happened, because that's how life goes. The profound hides in the ordinary. That night, after they put Anna Grace to sleep, Evan sat at his desk, the same one he'd used since his mother's nonprofit began. The letter she left him, the one about people changing when they finally listen, still hung above it. He stared at it for a long time, then began to type. This project began with one woman who decided her last chapter wouldn't be written by anyone else. It's for the mothers who were told they were too much, for the fathers who never learned how to say sorry, for every person who gave everything and was thanked with silence. This is for you, because it's never too late to take back your story. He hit publish. The post went viral within days, shared thousands of times, quoted on podcasts, picked up by local news. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was true. And in that small truth, Anne's quiet rebellion lived on. In the closing shot, if this were a Netflix documentary, the camera would drift through the community center at dusk, children laughing, volunteers stacking books. The mural of Anne Morales painted across the far wall. The narrator's voice would fade in low, calm, certain. She was never the loudest in the room, but the world is quieter now because she made it gentler before she left. And for those who once took her for granted, her silence became the sound of their redemption. 2 years later, the Second Chances Project celebrated its 5th anniversary. The community hall was full: teachers, volunteers, single parents, teenagers, people whose lives had been quietly repaired by the work Anne began. A photo of her hung near the stage, simple and unadorned, just as she would have wanted. Evan stepped up to the microphone, holding a note card he didn't need. He looked at the faces in front of him, people who, in another life, might have been invisible, the way his mother once was in her own home. "We started this program in honor of one woman," he said, "but we kept it alive because she reminded us of something we all forget, that strength isn't loud and love isn't service. They're choices, quiet ones." The crowd fell silent. Some nodded, some cried. Behind him the banner read, "You are not a burden, you are a beginning." That evening, when the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Evan lingered in the empty hall. The janitor swept confetti into neat piles. Hana was in the corner, rocking their daughter, now 3 years old, her tiny curls catching the light. On the stage, Anne's photograph seemed to watch them, steady, patient, eternal. He walked over, touched the edge of the frame, and whispered, "We did it, Mom. You were right, letting go isn't losing. It's the start of something bigger." Hana joined him, their daughter squirming in her arms. "Say goodnight to Grandma," she said softly. The little girl reached out a hand and touched the photo, mumbling something that sounded like thank you. Evan smiled through the ache in his throat. Outside, the sky over the city was the same shade of silver blue Anne had loved. The air smelled faintly of rain and lilacs. Evan looked up at the old apartment tower, where she had once lived, the window on the 10th floor, still catching the reflection of the streetlights. He imagined her there, a cup of tea beside her, the world quiet, her story complete. But in truth, it wasn't complete. It was multiplying through every letter of encouragement the nonprofit sent, every woman who stood a little taller after reading Anne's words, every child who watched their parent reclaim self-respect and thought, maybe I can too. Later that night, after Hana and the baby had fallen asleep, Evan sat at his desk again. He opened the drawer and pulled out his mother's final letter. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the ink was still dark, deliberate, graceful. He read it slowly, aloud this time. "People will forget what you do for them, Evan, but they'll never forget the moment you stopped needing their approval. Live from there. It's quieter, but it's honest." He closed the letter, leaned back, and smiled. For the first time, the word quiet didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like peace. He opened his laptop, typed out one more message, not a post, not a press release, just a note to himself at the top of the page. My mother's revenge was grace. She was 74 when the world stopped seeing her, but she saw herself clearly, fiercely, beautifully, and from that moment, everything changed. She didn't fight for recognition. She simply became impossible to forget.